appears to be a health situation in relation to Mr. Bryan, it might be urgent that he be taken out as soon as possible.
Okay, let's find out what the health of the police speak and find out what this health situation is. Yes. The officers find out, please. Now back with Mr. Bryan. He is now back in court. In respect of the starting point for leadership of a criminal organization, in these circumstances here, we have identified the multiple attackers, use of guns, pre-planned and premeditation, arson where necessary, some murders committed in daylight, others by night, no evidence of efforts to conceal identity, committed over a period of time on an ongoing basis. So all of this shows that here was an organization that was operating with impunity. And so leading such an organization suggests that the starting point should be between 25 and 30 years. So in my view, the starting point here is 27 years for leadership of the organization. No aggravating factors to take it up further, but are there mitigating factors? Has no previous conviction. When to looking now at the social inquiry report, was said to have been loved by many in the community who saw him as a positive influence. There were those who thought otherwise. It appears that his father, who began his own life in crime, later became a man of peace, later converted to Rastafarianism, and left that part of his life behind. And the report indicates that his father was suggesting to him, or at least to the mother and to Mr. Bryan, that there should be this conversion to Rastafarianism. Well, clearly the father's efforts at conversion at that time didn't produce a desired fruit. And it was Rastafarianism for the sake of Rastafarianism. The impression that I got from the report was that the father was saying this is a new way of living. This is a better way of living. So that is what the father was trying to suggest. But as I said, the father's efforts there were not successful. And so he was raised largely, if not exclusively, after a particular point in time by his mom. So while we take account of the absence of previous convictions and the opinion of some members of the community, that has to be balanced now against the way in which these crimes were committed and what led up to them. And as I indicated, they have actually resulted in the deaths of 4 persons. And so, in the context of this case, including considering the prospect of rehabilitation, it is difficult to see any good reason why the sentence on leadership should be reduced other than for the time already spent in custody. And as I indicated earlier, the evidence shows that it does not appear that Mr. Bryan intended to give up his life of crime unless or until he was caught by the police, which has now happened. Given the way that the organization operated, it was one in which violence was a constant part of the way in which it conducted its affairs. And that violence extended to murder, and arson and shootings. So the sentence now has to be disabling Mr. Bryan from being able to conduct this kind of activity for an extended period of time. In his plea mitigation, Mr. McFarlane indicated that the fact that Mr. Bryan insists on his innocence should not be held against him. Mr. Bryan says he's capable of reform, and I will never say that anybody is incapable of reform as a philosophical idea, as a practical, not as a practical matter, but as a philosophical idea. You can't say nobody or anybody is incapable of reform, but as to whether now, based upon the material, the evidence is there to suggest that. I must confess that I'm hard-pressed to see it, and as I indicated, it was his arrest that interrupted his leadership of the criminal organization. What the evidence shows is that Mr. Bryan was a man of extreme violence and was not afraid or hesitated to kill and to kill again and again and again to further his aims as he saw it. Now, Mr. McFarlane indicated, which I agree with, that counts 7 and 8 should be seen together, meaning they relate to the same incident, and same argument was made in respect of counts 11 and 12, and I agree with that. But counts 6, 15, and 19 are sort of standalone in that they are not paired with any other count on the indictment, at least not just yet. So Mr. McFarlane had suggested that the sentences on count 7 and 8 should be concurrent. I have no disagreement with that. And also that the sentences on counts 11 and 12 should be concurrent. I have no difficulty with that either. Now for the offenses other than count 1, these are facilitation offenses. Well, that's not quite true. They're all facilitation offenses except, let me rephrase it. You have facilitation of a substantive offense such as murder, and you have facilitation of conspiracy. Let's put it that way more accurately. Count 7 is facilitation of murder. Count 8, facilitation of arson. Count 11, facilitation of conspiracy to murder. Count 12, facilitation of murder. Count 15, facilitation of murder. And count 19, facilitation of conspiracy to murder. And so what I understood counsel to be saying is that at the very least, or I think he was hoping otherwise, but at the very least, in respect of the facilitation of the conspiracies, the sentences should be lower or certainly not the same as the facilitation of the substantive offense of, say, murder and arson. That is how I understood the submissions that were being made. Premise being that the facilitation of a conspiracy, while serious, is not as serious as the facilitating the actual murder itself. And in principle, I don't have any difficulty with that. So now, the facilitation offenses did 3 things, as I said before. They assisted in establishing that a criminal organization existed. They assisted in establishing that Mr. Bryan was the leader of the criminal organization, and that they showed that the offenses were committed over a period of time. So we're going to be grouping count 7 and 8 as one, count 11 and 12 as another, and then we'll look at count 6, 15, and 19 as standalone offenses. So having regard to the evidence as outlined in respect of counts 7 and 8, where Mr. Bryan was identified as one of the persons by the church who went over, the group of persons, along with the driver who went over to fisheries, and what Mr. Bryan said before he went over to fisheries, they're going to be shelling down over there. And when you look at all the circumstances, including the distribution or at least the visible display of what appeared to be firearms, as well as the Molotov cocktail, which was in open, unimpeded view, according to the driver, made it clear that at the very least, mayhem of some kind involving, at the very least, serious bodily harm and possibly property damage would be taking place that evening. And Mr. Bryan facilitated those intended activities and facilitated the actual occurrence of those activities. So bearing in mind all the circumstances concerning count 7 and 8, and keeping in mind that the maximum penalty is 20 years, and keeping in mind as well that in respect of count 7 and 8, death of 2 persons were the outcome of the activity, it is my view that the starting point here should be 17 years for count 7, right? In respect of count 8, starting point, in my view, should be 17 years as well, since the whole idea of going over there was to either kill the persons by shooting or by burning or both. It turned out that their bodies were burnt inside the house and they died from gunshot injuries. So in either way, whether it was by arson or by shooting, the clear intention was to kill these 2 persons. So the starting point, in my view, for count 17 and 18 should be 17 years. 7 and 8 should be 17 years. No aggravating features to put it up. Question is whether there are any mitigating features to bring it down. Having regard to all the circumstances here, I think it's a standstill, nothing to bring it up or to take it down. So we remain at 17 years for counts 7 and 8. And in particular because it resulted in the death of 2 persons. They resulted in the death of 2 persons. So now we come to counts 11 and 12. Count 11, facilitating a conspiracy to murder, and count 12, facilitating the actual murder of the same person. Those offenses should be taken together, as in sentences will be concurrent. So what is the appropriate sentence there? I'm just trying to find my notes here. Right. So in respect of the conspiracy to murder, facilitating that offense in respect of count 11, yes, it is connected to count 12, but count 12 resulted in the death of 1 individual as distinct from 2. So I think the starting point should be lower. And so in my view, the starting point for the conspiracy to facilitating the conspiracy to murder should be 10 years. That is on count 11. In respect of count 12, the starting point should be 12 years. Why 12 years? keeping in mind that when you're dealing with count 7, there are 2 persons who suffered death there. Now we have a situation where you had 1 person, and so the sentence ought to reflect the difference between 2 persons dying as opposed to 1 person dying. I'm not saying that one life is inherently more valuable than another, but the number of persons who die should make a difference, and it does in this particular case. So, in count, did I say what the number of years should be? Respect of count 12? 12 years, right. 12 years, right. Then now you have count 6, which is a standalone count, and trying to give effect to the different principles and weighing the different principles that I outlined earlier in respect of count 6. It resulted in the death of 1 person. It's a shooting death, similar to count 12. I mean, there are differences in the sense that in respect of count 12, it is said that Mr. Bryan drove by, was near to the vicinity of where the gentleman in count 12 was shot and killed, but that is not a sufficient difference to make it more aggravating or less aggravating, as the circumstances are very similar. So in respect of count 6, the starting point is also 12 years there. We're now at count 15. That involved the murder of the Rastaman that was facilitated, planned and encouraged by Mr. Bryan. So the starting point there to me again is 12 years. And that takes us to count 19. That was facilitating conspiracy to murder someone unknown. Very similar to count 10. And so the starting point there is count 11. Count 11 is 10 years. There's one that's missing. I've dealt with counts, just a moment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've dealt with counts 11 and 12. Have I covered all of them?
Yes.
Right. Just making sure. Right. Right. So where we are now is, right. So count 1, I'd said was 27. Right. So starting point then for count 1, 27 years. Count 7 and 8, 17 years each. Count 11 and 12, count 11, 10 years. Count 12, 12 years. Count 6, 12 years. Count 15, 12 years. Count 19, 10 years. Starting points. Now, as I said, in none of these, I see any aggravating factors to increase the number of years. Are there any mitigating factors in these circumstances to warrant a reduction? Other than the fact of no previous convictions, I am not convinced that there are any mitigating factors here to warrant any reduction. So the starting point remains the end point. So what Mr. Bryan has been in custody 5.5 years. So when they take away the 5.5 years, so in count 1, That leaves us with 21 and a half years. 5 from, yes. For count 6, that leaves us with 6.5 years. I'm going to reduce for all counts. All counts. Respect of count 7, that would be 11.5 years. For count 8, it's 11.5 years. For count 11, that's 4.5 years. For count 12, that's 6.5 years. For count 15, that's 6.5 years. And for count 19, that's 4.5 years. Okay. Now, I'd said that I'd agreed with Mr. McFarlane that the sentences on counts 7 and 8 should be concurrent. So, sentences on counts 7 and 8 are concurrent. So that's 11.5 years there. In respect of the sentences on count 11 and 12 concurrently, to run concurrently, so that gives you a maximum there of 6.5 years. Right. So that leaves us now with counts 6, 15, and 19 and what to do with them. And count 1. What to do with them. Now, in this case, I think that the question of consecutive sentences should be considered. What is the principle relating to consecutive sentences? In principle, it's permissible. What the decisions indicate is that where the offenses arise out of the same circumstance, then in principle you should not have consecutive sentences. The court should look to see whether they can have a substantial sentence on the major offense and then the other sentences be made to run concurrently along with the major offense. But consecutive sentences are appropriate if the circumstances are such that the sentences, unless made to run consecutively, would not reflect the true criminality of what was involved. Here we have a gentleman who was a leader and a part of an organization that involved murder, shooting, and at least arson as well. We have a situation in which 4 persons died. Yes, 4. Part of count 19. So we had Dooley, we had Mr. Bryan, Miss Walker, Outlaw, and who else? And the Rastaman. There's 5 persons who died as a result of his activity. But for, as I said, the quirk in our criminal practice and procedure, he may very well have been prosecuted for the full offense of murder. But we are where we are with that. So, in my view, there should be consecutive sentences to reflect the full scope of the criminality and to ensure that the level of offending, the scale of the offending, the scope of the offending, the extent of the offending are adequately addressed at this phase of the trial. So, this is where we are now. So I have count 1, which is 23 years. Right. Let me cut and paste here. Count 1, which is 21 and a half years. And I had indicated that the unindicted offenses had established that Mr. Bryan is the leader of the criminal organization. And then the indicted offenses also established that he was a leader of the criminal organization, but they extended the scope over which the offenses occurred and therefore enabled the Crown to adduce all of that evidence to establish that he was the leader. And in that context now it was leader of a violent organization. So that is how we end up now at the 21 years. I have also said that the sentences on count 7 and 8 are concurrent, and the sentences on counts 11 and 12 are concurrent. So the sentences now on counts 6, 15, and 19. Yes? Count 6, 15, and 19 are to run concurrently with the sentence on count 1. Sentences on 6, 15, and 19 to run concurrently with the sentence on count 1. Got that, Mr. Registrar? Got that? So you have the sentence for count 1 and the sentence for counts 6, 15, and 19 to run concurrently with the sentence on count 1. Got that? Okay. Right. Now, the sentence on counts 11 and 12. With me so far? Sentences on counts 11 and 12 to run consecutive to the sentence on count 1. With me so far? And now, the sentences on counts 7 and 8. Yes? Sentences on count 7 and 8 to be consecutive to the sentence on counts 11 and 12. With me? The sentences on counts 11 and 12. So the sentence on count 6, 15, and 19 concurrently with the sentence on count 1. Sentence on count 11 and 12 consecutive to the sentence on count 1. And count 7 and 8 consecutive to the sentences on counts 11 and 12. Everybody got that? There's 2 consecutive sentences. Got that? I've covered all the counts. I've covered all the counts, yes? So it's 21 and a half plus 6 and a half plus 11 and a half. It's 21 and a half plus 6 and a half plus 11 and a half. There's a total of 39 and a half. Got that? Got that, Madam Court Reporter? Okay, right. So that's it then for Mr. Bryan. You can please remove him from the dock, please, Mr. Bryan. That's 39 and a half years in all. Okay?